All right, hello everybody. Welcome to a review of the book Doomsday Recon by Jason Anspach and Ryan Williamson. Now, Ryan Williamson, we read, or rather, I read and reviewed his book The Widow's Son a little while back, and while that book was, good, but with its flaws, this one is a little bit more polished, a little bit more interesting, a lot longer, which is both good and bad. But I'd say it's a pretty fun book. Um, let's see. One of the problems I had with The Widow's Son was the way that there was a bunch of not very well explained foreign language bits, and there's still some of that foreign language influence, this time Aztec specifically, in this book, but it's actually handled much better. Um, you know, if Williamson, for instance, likes to be be a linguist in his writing, then maybe Anspach was like, this isn't clear. You need to make this more clear, kind of thing happened, or something like that. In any case, it's a fun book. It's very easy to read. It's a little bit long. I'll discuss that a little bit more in detail a little bit later. It introduces kind of a cool, interesting, fun, very dark fantasy world based largely on Aztec mythology. There's some cool fiddling with nonlinear time, which is both interesting, mechanically, and also kind of a way for the author to sneak in equipment, people, objects, things from other time, from various other times. For instance, the main group of characters in this book heralds from 1989, but they end up meeting up with people from groups hundreds of years older than them, and decades younger than them, and there's some interesting interactions there. It has a kind of a fairly simple, straightforward plot for the most part. There's a couple of interesting twists here and there. There's a cool subplot with a group called Alpha Squad, members of the original cast of characters. That kind of early in the book, there's some events that cause a subplot with them to advance in a very interesting way, and they continue being interesting throughout. To the point of the end of the book, to the point where it looks like they're going to be an integral part of the later entries in the series. There's, the characters are good. I'd say that they are developed in a believable way. If and when there are fast turns of a character from one perspective to another, those turns are justified very well. There aren't any characters that seem to act like a blank slate, where they just kind of take upon themselves some particular mantle without any philosophical mantle, without any sign that they might be, inclined in that direction beforehand. Nobody seems to be particularly, out of character at any point. There are character conflicts, and they're treated with appropriate weights, not necessarily super high, not necessarily super low, but appropriate to the way that these characters are interacting with each other. Some characters get along, some don't, but they, because of the circumstances that they're in, they kind of have to suck it up and work together anyway. Some characters act as if they don't, but actually kind of do get along. There's some, some kind of nice elements there. All in all, the characters are vivid and fun, especially the characters that hail from this mysterious fantasy world. There's a lot of interesting nuances and characters with interesting philosophies coming from there. Each of the characters has unique traits, so while, you might find yourself saying to yourself, well, I can't really recall all the names of the characters necessarily, you can at least recall that, this guy was a really good medic, and he also had the special forces background, stuff like that. So the different characters stand out, not just because they have different names, which obviously they all have different names, but they also stand out because of their characteristics, which, is a basic criterion, but it's well accomplished in this book, is what I'm trying to say. One of the things that I actually really like about the way that the characters work in this book is that, at its base, it's a story about a group of a military squad that gets pulled into this fantasy world, and their kind of trials and tribulations as they try to figure out what the hell happened, and then also try to figure out if there's a way home, survive here as long as they need to figure out a way home kind of thing going on. And there's good uncertainty as to whether there's actually a way home, whether they're just going to have to kind of set up shop here. But throughout that, despite the fact that they're in this kind of dark, extremely violent, extremely hostile territory, the characters who they try to maintain their chain of command, basically, which obviously as a military unit they should do that. That makes sense. And one of the cool elements of this book is the way that there are examples of good leaders, and not just good leaders making obvious choices, but good leaders making tough choices and talking about and discussion, either in the book itself or kind of from a meta between the characters themselves, or in kind of a narrative perspective, like a meta discussion of the tough choices that leaders in this kind of situation might have to make. Right? You might end up doing some things that are awfully opposed to your basic principles just to survive in such a situation. And one of the things that I like the way this book handled is the way that the leaders in the book kind of not just have to deal with difficult choices, but also differ in the way that they react to these difficult choices. So, not to spoil anything, but there's a bunch of cases where these leaders have to basically give an order to their men, and they have to say, well, we're going to do this, or we're going to do that, and it's not a democracy. We're a military. We're trying to maintain that kind of military discipline, and so I'll hear your thoughts about the issue, but the final decision is mine as the commander. And I thought that was kind of a nice perspective that that often gets kind of obscured in books where like there's some loose cannon guy who goes off on his own kind of thing, or characters have ranks, but like it seems like they have a lot more, or rather they're given a lot more autonomy than they otherwise might, right? So that was kind of a fun element of the story that I enjoyed, and the way that the characters developed and interacted. Another cool thing about this story is that it's a group from 1989 kind of ending up in this, and you'd almost call it like, savage or medieval kind of Aztec fantasy world. And there are a lot of books that kind of play with the mixture of modern or semi-modern military technology and a magical fantasy world, right? Like this is a pretty common thing that happens in fiction. And I've seen a lot of stories where they go in either one direction or the other, where it's like, oh man, modern military hardware so OP, right? Where it's like, I mean, yeah, you can cast a fireball, but we have machine guns and mortars and F-16s and yada yada yada. And you see some stories that are written in that way, where it's like, yeah, we were a completely like game-breaking addition to this world, right? And then you also see the opposite, the polar opposite, where it's like, yeah, we have all this hardware, but we really can't stand up to, a dragon that's made out of obsidian or something like that, right? Like, there are cases, there are stories where modern people are thrown into these kinds of medieval situations, and they have to adapt to. They spend more time adapting to the world that they're in than dominating it. So those are kind of our two edges, right? Where military tech so OP, magic so OP, right? And this book kind of cuts it right down the middle, because what it does that I think is really interesting is that it deals with the logistics. It doesn't spend a lot of time doing it. It doesn't bore you with details, but it keeps a good eye on like how much material, how much supply, or how many supplies the unit has. And it handles very well, I think, the diminishment of those supplies over time, and they're concerning themselves with resupply, trying to find substitutes for things that they need, kind of getting desperate in certain situations because they are running out of this stuff that they need, having to leave expensive equipment behind because there's no fuel, things like that. And so, while their military technology is very powerful, and it's very effective in a lot of ways, there's also cases where, the fantasy aspects kind of come to the forefront and force them to change their tactics, to adapt, to, get into a dangerous situation. They're neither overpowered nor completely, completely dominated by their environment. It's a good mixture, and the way that handling logistics is covered, I think, is appropriate and keeps a good level of tension throughout the book. One of the things I liked was the choice of having the main characters come from semi-modern era, right, 1989. It means that there's opportunities for two different things to happen. One, for them to encounter older tech and have to adapt it, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, for instance, it shows that certain characters are more familiar or more knowledgeable about this older tech, and so they become the instructors on how to use it and stuff like that. And then you also get the opportunity to have these characters from 1989 be exposed to more modern military tech, which enables them to say, "Oh man, this radio is way nicer than the radio that I had." Stuff like that. So that's kind of fun because the combination of the fantasy setting with that weird time nonlinearity gives the writers a good opportunity to make those to make those fun comparisons, to have the characters experience new things that they otherwise wouldn't have experienced, which is kind of a very nice little touch to play around with. I wanted to talk a little bit about the perspective of this book, which this is a book that is written, generally speaking, in the first-person perspective. There are some positives and negatives to using the first-person perspective, right? Another series of books that is written in first person is the Nero Wolfe series by Rex Stout, and I enjoy those a lot. But then at the same time, there are some difficulties with the first-person perspective that you can fix by moving to a third-person perspective. The most obvious one is that in a book that is entirely first-person perspective, you kind of know that the POV character is not going to die, right? And so there's a certain amount of tension that you can't bring to bear when you're dealing with a first-person perspective. However, in this book, I would say that the kind of the illusion of plot armor for the POV character is fairly minimal. Like I would say that the authors do a very good job of making the POV character seem relatively vulnerable. He takes a lot of damage throughout the course of this book, and so while he's not necessarily in danger, while you're kind of aware that he's not necessarily in danger of dying, you also see that he is not, some kind of Superman who always managed to just scrape by without taking a hit in every situation. It makes the book seem a little bit more realistic, and it kind of helps to dispel any feeling of the main character, the POV character, being plot armored. This plot armor feeling is kind of one of the drawbacks of a first-person writing, especially in books and story types where a lot of characters die, right? Like, in Rex Stout, you can get away with a first-person perspective because it's not friggin' Game of Thrones where everybody dies. It's not Macbeth or Hamlet. It's a story about detectives, and the detectives are going to survive. It's somebody else who gets murdered, right? That's the hook in most Nero Wolfe books. In books like this, where there's a lot of combat, where there's a lot of casualties, where there's a lot of danger, the first-person perspective can be a bit weaker because you know that the POV character is not going to be in that much damage, or not in enough danger to actually harm them, generally speaking. This kind of perspective is suitable for a series, which in fact this book is part of a series. According to Amazon, there are 3 books in the Doomsday Recon series, and this is the first one. So, having a consistent point of view can be helpful. And again, as I mentioned in a previous video, there are some things that you can do with a first-person perspective vis-a-vis character development. For instance, you can have your POV character react to his introduction to some other character, have feelings about different characters, and that can make things that can help make characters a little bit more vivid, as opposed to third-person perspectives where, if you're not careful, you can kind of stumble or wander into kind of like a bird's eye view where you're not really experiencing any of the character's feelings. Putting yourself into a first-person perspective keeps you from taking that bird's eye view. So despite its drawbacks, there are some advantages too. Yeah, in this book, the handling and the development of the first-person POV character, I would say, are above average. There's enough danger, enough damage taken by the POV character that it's almost like, yeah, he'll probably survive, but at the same time, there's a non-zero probability that you might find yourself in the POV of a different character at some point in the next book, for instance. Stuff like that. There's some good development. I don't like mystery boxes, or rather, that's probably too strong a phrase. But like, it's very easy to screw up mystery boxes where you kind of, tease something and then you don't really develop it at all. And we've seen cases where writers have like made a mystery box without thinking about what's going to be inside it, and so you end up with this very underwhelming conclusion where it's like, oh, it's this, or even worse, oh, it's nothing, right? So, what I will say is that there are some elements of this character's development, of the POV character's development, that are not told to you, that are not concluded by the end of this book. It was obviously designed to be part of a series. And so I will say that those elements are, at the same time, interesting enough that, they're kind of like, oh, maybe I will continue reading the series, while not being so integral to the plot or to the development or to the setting that you're like, oh, I can't believe they didn't answer that, or I can't believe they came up with such a lackluster answer to that mystery that they brought up. I'd say that it's done fairly well. So, good. And then of course there are other mysteries throughout the story that are revealed by the end of the story. So that's kind of nice. There's one flaw in this book that I want to talk about a little bit too, and that is something that I see a lot in a lot of stories, especially pulpy stories, where, how to describe it? The main characters start working for somebody new, or they start working for somebody at the beginning of the story, for instance. And, the reveal at the end is that, the reveal at the end of this arc, whatever, part of the book or a few chapters or whatever it is, whatever that reveal is, generally speaking, the reveal is that, oh, we were working for the bad guys kind of thing. It's kind of an are we the baddies moment, right? Or maybe we just joined the baddies is more accurate. And I see this done a lot in recent fiction where, is this the bad guy team or is this the good guy team? Even in shades of gray, you can tell light gray from dark gray, right? So, generally speaking, you don't want your main characters to be on the dark gray team, even if those two shades are kind of somewhat close together, right? There are certain philosophical borders that you don't want to cross, right? I don't want to join a group that does human sacrifice kind of thing, or stuff like that. So and a lot of the times in stories, this is kind of like a question that gets asked and then revealed very quickly. There was a game that I played called like something Star Heroine or something like that. It was like a kind of a retro RPG, and it had this problem in spades. You started the game and you're working for this organization, and then you complete one mission, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, these are the bad guys. But like, it's not done in a satisfying way, which like totally turned me off of that game. There's something like that happening here where the main characters, the main groups, meet up with another group. I won't give any details to try to avoid spoiling much, and they do meet up with multiple groups of different people throughout the book, so hopefully this doesn't directly spoil anything. But they're basically like, oh, they're being relatively friendly to us. We think, are they the good guys? Are they doing bad things behind the scenes? How much of what they're doing do we know about? That kind of question comes up, and what ends up happening is that in the space of 50 pages, it's like, yep, they're the bad guys kind of thing. And it's not very like subtle, and it's not very nuanced, and it happens very quickly. And so what I'm going to say is my kind of main criticism of this book from kind of a bird's eye perspective is that, considering how long the book is, right? And considering that it was already designed to be part of a series, if it were me, what I would have probably preferred, maybe not what I would have done, because I might have made the same mistake too, but what I think I would have preferred would be for them to work with this group for a longer period of time. Even to the point where what ends up happening is that you split this one book into two, and you tack on a bit of extra time spent with this group, because what happens when you spend more time with a group that you're not sure if they're good guys or bad guys is that they have a chance to kind of, in subtle ways, win you over to their side, right? If they're like, well, we make sure that we do, yes, we do this thing that you don't like, but the caveat is that we make sure that we don't do this thing, which is part of the big reason why you don't like this particular category of action. We don't like that you we don't like that you enslave your prisoners of war, right? But the reason that enslaving prisoners of war is bad is for X, Y, Z, and of these reasons, we can't manage X here because of cultural issues with our borders. We can't manage Y here, and we don't do Z as a matter of principle. You kind of show that this group that you're trying to figure out, are they light gray or are they dark gray, right? You try to figure out, you try to have this group itself try to convince you that it's light gray, as opposed to like, all right, here's your mission. Oh, you found out we're the bad guys. It's very it's done too abruptly in this book, and that's not necessarily a hit against this book in particular. I see it happening a lot, but this is one of those things where for a book that's this long, you could have easily split it into two books and given them a little bit more time to kind of poke at the grayness of who they're working with. And the other thing about it is that because it happens so fast, there's some really interesting foreshadowing ideas that happen throughout this development. And those foreshadowing developments are subtle enough that a person might miss them, or there might be another explanation for them, right? It's kind of like, I have a bad feeling kind of thing, right? And if you took more time to allow it to kind of simmer, you could kind of allow that foreshadowing to kind of fall away from the reader's mind. But with how fast it's done in this book, it's like, there's this foreshadowing, and then like 10 pages later, it's like, okay, it's the bad guy. They're the bad guys. And I thought it was good foreshadowing. I was like, oh, that's kind of a, like when the reveal happened, I was like, oh, that was kind of a neat foreshadowing. It's too bad it took me 5 minutes to reach the point where I had to think back to 5 minutes ago, right? So that's kind of what I thought there. I already mentioned that this is the first in a series of 3. What I'll say for now is that, it's good. I probably will read the next one. But at the same time, it didn't wow me so much that I'm in a hurry to read the next one. So I'd say, fun book. One thing I will say, just kind of a caveat for some readers, some of the details of like the violent occurrences in this book get pretty gory. I would say that it doesn't get to the point where I would like accuse them of like reveling in it kind of thing. Like you see some books, some writers who are like, oh yeah, I got to make this as horrible and gory as possible. This book The descriptions are vivid. If you have a really weak stomach, you may want to kind of like pass a little bit. I mean, a very weak stomach. There was no point where I felt nauseous reading the book, right? But at the same time, there's a lot of visual detail, a lot of sensory language, which is good, right? But at the same time, it's not for everybody. So with that, I'll say, good book, much more polished than The Widow's Son. Easy to read, very pulpy, very relaxed kind of read. A lot of bang for your buck. It's a long book, so that's a good thing too. Short chapters, easy to pick it up, read 5, 7, 10 minutes, set it back down, pick it up again. Good character development, fun setting, interesting character interactions and stuff like that. Some fun subplots. Definitely if you're into kind of that dark fantasy / military kind of genre of story, I would say this is definitely go check it out. Especially if you have any interest in like Aztec mythology, stuff like that. There's a lot of fun like tidbits there. It's one of those things with the foreign language thing. When you have a character that's just kind of like occasionally spitting out a full sentence in a foreign language, it's like, I have no idea what you said, and so I need context clues somewhere else. But the way that it's done in this book is a lot smoother, where it's like a proper name or like the species of an animal or something like that. And so, you don't get as much like, wait, I got to look for context here. You just sit and you read, and there's a funny word, but it's unique enough that you can pick it up later on. And there's like a description, and it's a description of a place or a thing or an animal or something like that. And so it's way easier to read. You don't have to like think about it. There's no points. One of the things I mentioned about The Widow's Son as a criticism was that there were some weird expressions that kept appearing over and over again throughout the book, and there's none of that here. Every new chapter is pretty fresh. The characters are interesting. They have a lot of different interactions. They go through a lot of difficult trials and tribulations. Fun book. Not like gotta buy the next one like right now, but I definitely will check it out at some point. So yeah, that's my review of Doomsday Recon. First, currently of 3 in the Doomsday Recon series. Aztec mythology mixed with late 80s military tech. Lots of fun character stuff. Lots of supernatural goodness. Lots of good, vivid description, even if it does get a little bit gory sometimes, and just kind of an overall fun story. Good mix overall. So yeah, positive review for sure. And especially if you're into this kind of genre, like, military fiction, cross of military and fantasy fiction, and Aztec mythology. If you're into any of those 3, you will like this book, probably. So that's my thoughts. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you know what to do. And I will see you all next time for goodness knows what. All right. It's Thursday, so we're getting close. Probably have a good weekend, and I'll see you later.